Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a Sunday evening edition of the GPG Podcast. I think, gents, this might be the first time the three of us have been together for a little while now, hasn't it? So it's good. It's good to have the three of us here.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think.
It's been a very long time.
Yeah. It's been scheduling has been difficult, as we always say. Life can make it a little bit tricky to get everyone together, but it is good to have the three of us on the show tonight. So obviously, you've got myself, Scott. We also have Puxley. Puxley, you were here 2 weeks ago, weren't you? I think it was Luke that missed that.
Yes, 2 weeks ago, I believe. Yeah, I was the last one.
2 weeks ago when we last did a show. Christ, I thought it was longer than that. It feels like it's been ages. I don't know why that is. So, yeah, how have you been, mate?
Yeah, I've been very well, thank you. I think I said on the last show, recently started a new job and stuff, which I've been kind of jumping right into, and it's quite busy quite early on, and I've been on the road a little bit as well. So hence I'm trying to keep on top of news. I have for the most part. I've had to do a few overnight stays and stuff in relatively mixed hotel quality and things like that. But no, it's all good fun, thanks. And yeah, I'm slowly cracking on with things, catching up with stuff. And, you know, as you said, it's been a long time and I'm looking forward to chatting games with all you lovely people. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Lovely. And actually tonight is a little bit of a special show because it's actually a live streaming of some 2-on-1 therapy that we've got scheduled for Luke Steele, just to get over some of his frustrations from Friday evening. We're going to be talking a lot about the Xbox, Xbox acquiring Activision Blizzard, particularly the CMA. So thankfully we have a little bit of expertise on hand tonight. So Luke, thanks for joining me. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Yeah, it's keeps rumbling on. This, as we all know, but it's interesting to some extent. It's not interesting when people who don't know anything start talking about it, and I don't mean just opinion people, because everybody can have an opinion on it. It's when people start, misrepresenting things. That's kind of the thing that really grinds my gears. But yeah, so it'd be good to talk about it. It kind of keeps progressing, which keeps giving us something to talk about, I suppose. So
yeah, I think for me, Luke, I think the whole thing has been like a really fascinating peek behind the curtain. You know, when you see some of the documents and stuff that come out off the back of these things, it's things that you don't ever get to see. But for you, is this just boring and stuff that you used to see in sort of most days, or do you find some excitement and interest from it?
Yeah, it's actually not something I see, all the time. It's kind of sporadic, this stuff, because there's only a very small amount of stuff that has a competition element to it. You know what I mean? Like, it's only certain deals that would. So, I find it really interesting. I mean, it's, part of my job, so I guess I have to find it somewhat interesting. But I'm in the rare position where I do also enjoy just kind of learning about it and, discussing it and seeing it play out. I've seen this process play out before from, an actual party side, so it's nice to not be on that side and just like be looking at it through a non-party side, really, where you can just kind of enjoy it and have a look at what the CMA is saying and what parties are saying, and it's a really interesting deal generally. So
yeah, well, we're going to get into it a fair bit tonight. I think Friday kind of kicked off a little bit with I think it started with a thread by the CMA on Twitter. And kind of kicked off from there, shall we say. So hopefully we'll be able to, maybe learn a little bit more. I think if there's one thing I'd like to get from tonight is maybe just a little bit of more information or education on the topic, because, I think you're right. There's been a lot of misinformation, shall we say, or just maybe a lack of understanding, particularly maybe from our American friends who maybe have particular opinions on how things work in the UK, because maybe they're expected to be similar to the US. So yeah, but before we do that, because I guess that could be a long and lengthy topic, we'll see what else we get into. What have you gents been playing this past week or two?
Well, I've mostly been playing, so I haven't played too much in the last week or so. But
you have been on holiday, but
I've been on holiday.
You've got an excuse.
So I was playing some bits while I was on holiday. So a bit of Splatoon 3, and various kind of little bits on the Steam Deck as well. But since Friday, which is when I got back, the main thing I've been playing is actually on screen now. So Overwatch 2, because I kind of missed. Obviously, couldn't really play that while I was away. No different unless I wanted to, lug a Series X or a PS5 or something with me. Yeah, I've been playing a lot of that on PC. Trying to get through the Battle Pass. And I'm sort of level 38 now on the Battle Pass, I think. So
you're
coming up to
flying
halfway.
through them, mate.
Yeah, although I did buy the Premium Plus, whatever level it was. So I think it's like 20 levels.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm about 18. So which is still pretty good for the small amount of time I've actually had to play it. But yeah, I did get a boost because I bought the extra pass thing. Whatever it is. So.
Yeah, I can't remember what's called. I haven't actually dabbled in the Battle Pass myself. I think I'm like level 11 or something like that at the moment. Yeah. So this is my gameplay of Overwatch on the screen. I'm a little bit ashamed to say it's not my finest. I'm struggling a little bit with it because I'm playing a lot of Apex and Halo, and switching between three very different shooters can actually be quite tricky. But I've really enjoyed what I've played of it so far. I mean, I'm still struggling with the Overwatch 2 element. It's just Overwatch to me. I don't really think they needed to put a 2 on it, but I guess they kind of wanted that relaunch of the game, so to speak. But otherwise, yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Can you get Battle.net on the Steam Deck? Look, I'm assuming not.
I don't actually know.
If you could, you probably wouldn't be able to play online.
Yeah, I think I don't think you can. I mean, although I don't know. I mean, I guess if you're just you do the Windows install, then you could, in theory, put it on. But I don't know if anybody's. I'm sure someone's tried that, right? Someone's surely tried that out.
Yeah, because most people have got HES on the Steam Deck, like even on like the Linux OS. So.
Yeah. So I don't know if it works. But a lot does, so maybe it does.
Yeah. Maybe want to check out, and then maybe next holiday, man, you can have yourself a little bit of Overwatch.
Oh yeah, that'll be terrible on a handheld. I think it just would be nice to play it all, but I could do it maybe.
Exactly. And Pux, I appreciate you've been on the road a lot, mate. Being a little busy. Have you found a little bit of time to play some games in your spare time?
Yeah. I have, believe it or not. So the on-the-go game I've been playing at the moment is that I've gotten back into Mario Kart Tour a little bit because it's very quick and easy to pick up. I know you have particular thoughts about those kind of games, but
I play a mobile game every single day. Remember our confessions?
Dragon Ball and stuff, don't you? Yeah, I remember now.
I'm closing in on like 2,000 days on that thing now. So
Christ. Yeah, so similar things. Yeah, I've been getting into Mario Kart Tour again. I've kind of blitzed through all of the different cups in the current tour, so I'm kind of up to date on that one. But I think about 2 or 3 weekends ago, my wife and I basically binged the Cyberpunk Edge Runners anime on Netflix. Personally, we loved it. Thought it was fantastic, and I've jumped on the bandwagon like a lot of people and rebooted Cyberpunk since obviously the most current update 1.6. And I've been having a blast of it, and I think the game's been pretty fantastic so far. I think I've managed to get about 20 hours in, and there's obviously the game's massive, right? There's so much to do and to find and to explore and discover, and another adjective. But no, that's kind of mainly where I've been at, actually. And I think, was it a couple of days ago? I think Friday, it was. Scorn got released on Game Pass, and I jumped onto that for all of about half an hour before having questionable views on it. I wasn't massively drawn in personally, but I think maybe I need to give it a bit more of a chance. But yeah, that's a very quick summary as to what I've been playing. But have you guys tried Scorn yet, out of interest?
No, and to be honest, I don't think I will. You're
not missing out. Is my opinion.
Yeah, I followed it since it was announced, as in back in 2014.
Yeah.
So I've always kind of been interested in it. Obviously, big H.R. Geiger fan as well. So it's H.R. Geiger the game. So I will definitely check. I haven't yet. It's downloaded, and I will check it out. But I haven't yet. But I mean, clearly it's very very divisive. Some people think it's really good. Other people think it's absolutely terrible. So I'll be interested to see where I fall on it.
Yeah. I remember first being introduced to that on Easy Allies. Look, I don't know if you were listening to the podcast back then when it was basically their podcast sponsor for
yes, yeah,
what
it's
felt
gone
like forever.
Sponsor. Yeah. Which is why they're not reviewing it. So they said that they won't do a review of it, although they will.
Which I think's fair.
Which I think is fine.
But
yeah,
but at the same time, I wouldn't. The guys here, I wouldn't. It's not like they're a sponsor of them now. So if they do, I think it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But I understand why. But yeah, I think for that, it has been really divisive, as you say. But I think a lot of it has come from like maybe just a lack of understanding as to what the game is.
Yeah,
because I've seen some people expect it to essentially be a first-person shooter, and when they found out it's not, more or less being, the game's crap. And yeah, the game doesn't look for me. I'm not really into that sort of. I think it just looks disgusting, more than anything. So, but I hope you enjoy it. I think it's fairly short as well, isn't it? It's not like a massive game.
It's meant to be like a 7-hour maximum or something. I think I've read, but yeah, apparently it's not that long. There's only about 5 acts, I believe, from what the reviews I've read. And what I found most interesting is a lot of reviews and comments and stuff I've seen online. I think there's only one particular part of the game where there's like some form of combat that happens. And the general consensus that I've seen so far is that that part almost feels unnecessary because there's little to no combat up to a certain point when you then out of nowhere have to do a little bit of it. So yeah, I mean, I'm still intrigued by it. I'm not put off, but again, the 15 minutes or so that I did spend with it, I was drawn in aesthetically, but gameplay wise, I was questioning it a little bit. But I am going to give it another chance. So
yeah,
watch this space, I guess.
Yeah, well, maybe chat about it on a future show if both you guys get a chance to check it out. I think for me, it is the aesthetic that puts me off more than anything else.
Really, I was drawn by that personally.
I think so. I think it looks good in terms of like graphically and things like that.
Just
but
disgusting.
In a way, yeah. People were calling it like the penis game for a reason. There's a lot of stuff. But maybe that's to be expected for that style anyway. So, lovely. Well, shall we get into it then, gents? Obviously, we haven't really chatted about it on this show, other than when it was first announced. I think we've kind of steered away from the conversation. I think maybe a large part because everybody's discussing it, but also at the same time, we do have, I guess, I don't want to say an insider or anything on it, but obviously we do have someone with experience in M&A and Luke on the show, so I thought it'd be worthwhile chatting about it after the news that came out on Friday evening. I think it was when, like I said earlier, things kind of kicked off a little bit. So what I'm hoping is we can maybe utilize Luke's expertise a little bit, and as I said earlier, maybe just provide a little bit of helpful information to help people understand kind of what things mean, what the processes are, that sort of thing. So is that okay with you, gents?
Yeah, sounds great to me.
Yeah.
Lovely. So I guess we'll start off. So what exactly happened on Friday? So Pux, have you been keeping up to date with all the developments with the CMA and Cade?
Yeah, I believe I'm relatively up to date. Yeah, unless there might be some small nuggets here and there I may have missed. But as far as I'm concerned, yeah, the CMA have pushed back. Well, Microsoft have responded, had a load of points basically saying that PlayStation are overdoing it. They're making themselves look like the innocent party here. And then they came back saying that effectively Xbox is in last place in the console war or something else, and all these different stats to make them look like they are nowhere near as good as I think the public consensus is on their position, and that PlayStation is too big to fail and stuff like that. Is that relatively on track, or have I missed any extra development since then?
Yeah, I think part of it, I think what you found is like a mixture of the stuff that's come out from the Brazilian it is Cade in Brazil, I believe.
Yeah.
Kind of the documents that have come out off the back of that. Those obviously have been translated from Portuguese, so at least that's what I understand. So I think maybe what you've heard, Puck, is like a combination of what's come out from Cade, and then also kind of the responses that have been going to and have come from the CMA. So it kind of all started on Friday evening, like I said, where essentially the CMA came out and they did a little tweet thread, which honestly, look, I found a little bit strange. Now, it might not be strange to you, but I found like the CMA, like that type of organization, using Twitter to kind of set their position, I found was a little unusual, because it was almost like very public facing, the post, while I kind of expected a lot of their dealings to be very private, almost private and confidential, and not necessarily as public facing as a Twitter thread might be. But essentially they came out and they said, here are the 3 key areas that we're considering when we're investigating the Activision Blizzard acquisition. One being the impact on the future of cloud or cloud gaming services. The second one, I believe, was multi-game subscription, so Game Pass, PS Plus, that sort of thing. And then also the first one that I think they highlighted was essentially the question of exclusivity of Activision content, and how that might impact pricing, features, quality, that sort of thing. And things kind of kicked off from there. And I think maybe what you find is, and when these things happen, is the internet is just full of Lukes. There's just so many M&A lawyers.
So many.
Like, I didn't realize there was that many of you existed. And I think what then happens is you get loads of misinformation being repeated, and it becomes really, really messy, and it's difficult to try and figure out what's actually true, what's not. So that's kind of where we're at as of Friday. So look, I just kind of want to maybe get your opinion first, which is I guess the CMA's current the process normal? Do they normally use Twitter? Is this a special case for this one? Maybe because of the rabid fanboys that are around, or is this fairly standard for these types of things?
Yeah, I think some people kind of look at the Twitter stuff and find it a bit strange. I'm not, and I think in the past, the reason for that was that people didn't realize that the CMA produce like documents that underpin their Twitter stuff, so they will tweet when there's some document publication, and basically their tweets are like a summary of that document. I think some people didn't realize that at the start. Perhaps they still don't. But the Twitter stuff isn't unusual. The CMA do it for, big ticket merger and acquisitions. So when they're tweeting, it's because they've published something, and then they tweet, across social media, across Twitter, what that is, a summary of it, and then they link you to the document. So in this case, it was a CMA's issues statement, which is something that they do between phase 1 and phase 2 to say, and it really offers no additional information. It's more of a summary of exactly what they've done in phase 1 and the areas from phase 1 that they're concentrating on in phase 2. So you were right to say, there were the 3 main theories of harm that they identified, which were the kind of Activision content, exclusivity, that sort of thing, quality of games, multi-game subscriptions, and then also cloud gaming. So yeah, not unusual for them to do that. And I don't know, people have this the thing I found really strange is they have like a weird hate for the CMA tweeting, if that makes any sense.
Do you think the social guy at the CMA just was like, what the fuck is going on?
Oh yeah. Because look, like if the CMA are looking at, I don't know, a merger between Pfizer and AstraZeneca, let's just say, and then they tweeted out a thread like this, like, gaming is the only area. Fanboys. Yeah, exactly. Gaming is the only area where they will get substantive responses from people on social media, because if Pfizer and AstraZeneca merge, no one gives a fuck apart from, the people behind the scenes. Obviously that has greater societal ramifications than this merger. But like, as you say, the Pfizer fanboys are coming out of the woodwork, being like, "This, this needs to go through," and then, Moderna come from the right, and they're like, "Well, no, they're like, this can't happen. Like, this is bad." So, it's like the only place that the CMA will literally be like, "What the hell? Like, this is weird." And maybe they'll probably have some self-aware people who know about gaming culture, etc. But when you see these idiots with their weird gaming avatars come out of the woodwork and start like denouncing your organization, denouncing the work you've done, I think they'll be a bit like, "Oh, this is quite strange." So, and I've heard the complaint before, that why are they tweeting, and the fact they use emojis in their tweets, and it's like, well, it's Twitter, isn't it? Like, it's not like, I would get it if like what they were tweeting was the only thing that they were putting out there about the merger, but the only reason they tweet, and the only time they tweet, is when they've published some document that underpins it. And it's a bit like the Twitter stuff is like an announcement of, we've done this, here's a summary of it on Twitter because we've got a character limit, here's a link to the document, go and read kind of the full analysis that we put out there. So it's a bit weird, to be honest, the reaction to it. But it is, I guess, it's still like, it's a bit strange to see a kind of regulatory authority engaging on social media. But then again, they're supposed to be for consumers, etc. And how do you reach consumers en masse? Well, you do it through social media, not through a government website. So that's it. So yeah, on Friday, all they did was publish their issue statement, which just outlines the issues that they kind of raised in phase one, which of those they're taking forward, which is all of them basically, and that's pretty much it. So no new information. I think people just got triggered again because they were like, "Oh no, this sucks." They shouldn't, don't do it, whatever. But that's kind of all that happened, and then kind of, I guess, with that you had all the various. There were Microsoft words that were said and all that other stuff as well. So,
yeah, because I think whenever the CMA issues any kind of statement, there's almost not necessarily a public response, but there'll be maybe, for example, GamesIndustry.biz will have reached out to Microsoft and Sony for comment, and then they will have some sort of response whenever anything like this happens. So, Pux. What did you see what happened on Friday, and how are you viewing it from your position? Do you think it's a little bit bizarre, the reaction that we're getting?
You might need to update me on what happened on Friday, sorry, if you don't mind.
So essentially, as Luke mentioned, it was just they issued an update, effectively no new information, but was essentially just, here's where we are right now, effectively, and I guess they highlighted the three key concerns with such an acquisition. But as Luke says, there was nothing really new there, but it was just because the CMA tweeted about it, it kicked off essentially. Obviously, a lot of people expressing their views, the closet M&A lawyers coming out and expressing their opinions on who's right, who's wrong, whether deals should go through or shouldn't. So, but I guess from your perspective, then maybe it's not something you've been keeping a particularly close eye on from that point of view, which, to be fair, might be a bloody wise thing. If I'm
I suppose. Well, the main things I have been seeing, apart from again the few things I've maybe just seen in passing as I scroll, is more so just, as you say, a lot, as Luke was saying as well, that like the internet lawyers of the world all over Twitter talking about it as if everyone's an expert of 20 plus years experience. And I've always found it quite amusing reading through threads on Twitter of people having seemingly all the same experience, yet having this completely different outlooks on it and what's actually happening. I think you said it at the beginning, Scott, as well, about the more interesting thing about all of this is when you get a lot of our overseas audience, which make large assumptions about how it works in the UK and about, oh yeah, Xbox are just going to pay a load of money to take the CMA to court and get it all overruled or something to that effect. And again, I'm by no means an expert either, but I believe I know enough to know that that's not quite how it works over here. That you can't just buy your way through a regulatory decision.
No, and I mean, obviously we've got the benefit of Luke having maybe provided us with like a little bit of insight in the past as to what the process is. So it's probably a good point. Maybe I appreciate this isn't exactly new, but look, it might be worthwhile kind of outside of this particular deal, maybe just helping people understand what the process is for this type of deal. So we're currently, has the phase 2 investigation actually started for this deal, Luke?
I don't think so. I think it starts after the end of the period for submissions to the issue statement. So the parties can kind of give extra opinion or information, etc., in relation to the issue statement, which was published on Friday. And I think that probably ends, I think it's about 2 weeks or something. When that ends, then phase 2 starts, basically. So then that whole review process starts anew, effectively.
Cool.
Yeah.
So effectively, Microsoft will have submitted kind of an intention to acquire to the CMA, and then I assume at some point shortly after that, phase 1 investigation will have started. And then not too long ago, the CMA essentially said, look, they were looking to take it to a phase 2. They did give a short window for, I guess, Microsoft to maybe discuss some concessions with them. Would that be fair to say? And then Microsoft essentially said, no, we don't want to give anything. And then the CMA effectively said, okay, we're going to phase 2. And then the issue statements came out Friday, and then I guess the phase 2 investigation will start in the not too distant future. So I think this is maybe where a lot of the frustration, maybe from your perspective, Luke, came on Friday. I know we were tweeting about it a little bit, but effectively, I think a lot of people are kind of expecting, okay, the phase 2 will go ahead and it will either get approved or not. Obviously, you can have your opinion either way as to whether it will be approved or not. And then if it doesn't get approved, well, obviously Microsoft will just take them to court and they will win. Is effectively, I think, a lot of the opinion for a lot of people. But that's not exactly how it works in the UK, is it? I believe we do have a specific process that's a little bit different to the US in particular. So is it worthwhile, do you think, maybe just, I guess, laying a little bit of the groundwork in terms of how that process would work when the decision is made by the CMA at the end of the phase 2 investigation?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what the CMA say at the end, but if the CMA were to block the deal, then there is a period where Microsoft and Activision can offer undertakings, which is effectively the same sort of period that happened at the end of phase 1, albeit it's a bit more fluid than that was. So they can offer some undertakings, and typically the CMA, well, any competition regulator, like structural undertakings, so divestiture of assets and that sort of thing, something to remedy the issues that the CMA have identified in this case. If they didn't want to do that, or if what they offered the CMA didn't like, then that's the deal is blocked from a UK perspective, and then the only things that Microsoft can do at that point are to make an appeal to the Competition Appeal Tribunal, which is an independent tribunal entity. It's independent of the CMA, oversees the CMA's actions. But the thing that some people are starting to get this now, which is good. I mean, they still run with really weird angles on it. And others just don't comprehend this at all. They don't get it, which is a bit annoying. But the thing that the tribunal can't do is they can't review the substantive merits of what the CMA have said. So in other words, they can't review the CMA's decision and say, oh, no, actually, it doesn't create a substantial lessening of competition. It's not likely to, therefore, we overrule that. All that CAT can do is they can review the CMA's decision on what are called judicial review grounds. So these are very specific. Whenever you take any public entity, public body to court, the court can only review these entities from this specific perspective, which means that they can only review if something that they've done is illegal, outside the scope of law.
like taking
irrational.
A bribe from Jim Ryan would maybe
like taking a bribe, seven bribes from Jim Ryan. That would be illegal. So there you go. So there we go. It'll get passed because they'll find all those bribes that Jim Ryan sent. Jesus. So that's one. The second one is if the CMA had been irrational in application of their powers, and this is the one. This is the one where people get really confused because like I've seen stuff online where people are like, well, it's clearly irrational because there was one that said the CMA said, for example, that Xbox games weren't available on any other game subscription platform, which was obviously a blanket statement. And obviously, to some extent, that was an incorrect statement, right? Because some Microsoft games are on PlayStation Plus, just as an example. But people think this is like this gotcha moment. And that's like nobody, like, that doesn't make any difference to the CMA's arguments. And that is not irrational behavior. Irrational behavior from the CMA would have to be something so obviously irrational that no reasonable person would have done the same thing in similar circumstances, or no competition body in the same circumstances would have done the same thing. And it's not like they would have analyzed information differently. It's almost as if they would have done it's hard to describe because it's only one of those things when you see it. Do you know what I mean? Like if I walk outside my front door and I just start throwing fried eggs everywhere, that's irrational behavior. There's nothing, like, it doesn't make any sense because no reasonable person would do that, right? So it's a CMA equivalent. At least. Not fried, maybe scrambled. It's the CMA would have to be doing something so strange that the tribunal would see that as irrational. And I've seen some people, again, this is because people don't know what they're talking about, link this back to the fact that CMA talks a lot about Sony in their analysis. It says impact on Sony and stuff. And people think, well, the CMA are being irrational because they're protecting the interests of Sony, which they're not doing. I understand that looks weird to some people, but this is how the CMA review things. When they review any merger, it's always by reference to rivalry. That's the main theory of harm. And the way that they kind of elucidate on a rivalry is by reference to the main competitor. What impact will this have on the main competitor? It's not them trying to protect the main competitor, but it's them trying to think hypothetically, if we let this go through, what happens to that rivalry? Because if it's the case that it doesn't lead to the rivalry lessening, right, the rivalry is still in place, then that's good and things are allowed on that basis. But if they think down the line this could kind of irreparably damage the rivalry, then that's when they intervene, and that's bad. And they do that by reference to rivalry, and then ultimately, because that rivalry has been irreparably damaged, that leads to worse outcomes for consumers in various types of ways. So again, the irrationality threshold is so high. I don't think the CMA has ever been tested on it. I don't think there's ever been an application of irrationality to the CMA. I don't think there ever would be, because it's a regulatory authority that isn't run by lunatics. You know what I mean? So that's the second ground. And the third ground is which kind of ties in with the first one, but not quite, is like a procedural error, right? They haven't followed procedure in some case. And this is something that the CMA, and again, we had Twitter threads on this. There was the Meta Giphy case recently that was taken to, that was a merger. It was taken to the Competition Appeal Tribunal. And they did find that there was one procedural error. The tribunal did find that the CMA committed one procedural error. And again, the way that people have interpreted this either tells me that they're idiots, or that they can't read, or a combination of both, / they're just ignoring what the case actually said. Because people have suggested that this shows that the CMA, people have said that this, what happened with Meta Giphy and the tribunal shows that in other cases the CMA have favoured third parties, like they're favouring Sony now. When in actual fact the Meta Giphy case had nothing to do with the CMA's analysis in respect of third parties, or the input of third parties on the CMA's analysis. Literally nothing to do with it. The one ground that the tribunal found that the CMA were procedurally incorrect on was that in a regulatory merger decision, it's kind of a principle that the parties to it, so in this case Meta and Giphy, deserve to have the full case laid against them by the CMA. So they deserve to be, they need to be apprised of kind of all the significant things that the CMA are reviewing. And the CMA, when they gave their provisional findings to Meta and Giphy, they redacted a great deal of information, and that was information they received from third parties that, had provided various bits and bobs of their own. And Meta and Giphy said, well, that's wrong because we didn't have the full case given against us because we had all this information from the CMA that was just redacted, so we didn't know what we were actually dealing with. And the tribunal agreed with that. And what they were saying in relation to third parties were that the CMA was trying to kind of balance its obligation to be confidential in the information it received from third parties and also balance how much it needed to disclose to Meta and Giphy, but they got that balance wrong. So they put too much weight on trying to keep stuff confidential for third parties and not enough weight on actually disclosing that to Meta and Giphy, given they were the parties. So that was the ground. That was the only ground that the CMA were found to have kind of erred on, essentially. And otherwise, the tribunal, again, this is what annoys me, people don't read this stuff, even in the case, the tribunal specifically say it's not our job to review the decision. We're not reviewing the decision. We will never review the decision of the CMA. And funnily enough, they said, even if we did, we completely agree, that the CMA kind of used its powers correctly, that they used its powers of analysis correctly, that they came to a reasonable conclusion, blah, 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 blah. So those are the three grounds that you can take the CMA to the tribunal for. If the tribunal, there's two kind of pivots then, I guess. If the tribunal just completely agree with the CMA, they don't think they've done anything wrong, that's it. Basically, you can, very limited circumstances, basically on the three circumstances I've described previously, then try and take the case up to the Court of Appeal, but you have to have permission from the tribunal to do that. So, or if you don't have permission, you then have to apply to court for them to consider it and hear it, which is very unlikely. And even if, again, you then get it up to the Court of Appeal, they review the CMA's decision on the exact same grounds that the tribunal do. So judicial review standards, those three points that I made. And if in circumstances where the tribunal, do think there's been some error of some sort that the CMA have committed, then they will just remit the case back to the CMA for them to do it again or to reconsider it, but only from the perspective of the error they've made. And in most cases, the CMA just comes to the same decision because, in Meta Giphy, for example, made absolutely zero difference. Because why would it? It wasn't anything substantive to do with their analysis. It was a point of confidentiality, really. So it's a very tenuous ground to actually be sent back anyway. Made no difference. So I know it's been quite long, but hopefully that's helpful.
No, I think that's good, Lucas. You covered a lot of the key misinformation that I was seeing on Friday. I did see the Meta case being referred to as an example where the CMA had lost the court case effectively, which obviously we know what wasn't the case. I think it's really important that that you point out that it didn't change the outcome of the case. Yes, the CMA was needed to do something slightly different. I know that's maybe a very simplistic way of putting it, but it didn't actually affect the outcome of their decision. Even if it does get referred to CAT, the CMA could review it again, and I guess in all likelihood, they would more than likely come to the same decision. So obviously, you mentioned the Court of Appeal being an option. Out of interest, do many cases end up going to the court of appeal? I suspect it's maybe rare, especially because deals of this size aren't particularly very common. But is that something that happens sometimes? No.
It does. There are competition cases that have gone to the Court of Appeal, but they have not gone for the reasons that people, I think they've gone for.
Okay.
So the main ones that go to the Court of Appeal are to do with fines. So if the CMA has fined, let's say mergers being contested, CMA have said we're blocking it. Parties have said we don't care, we're proceeding, or we're doing X, Y, and Z, then the CMA have powers to levy fines. And in the past, there have been a few cases about the size of the fines that the CMA have imposed at the Court of Appeal, because in addition to the kind of judicial review grounds, you can go to court about penalties, basically. So those are the, to my knowledge, the only Court of Appeal cases there have been in terms of competition law in the UK.
Yeah. Well, I do have a few more questions. I think it's really good just to have this, like I say, this kind of knowledge that typically you wouldn't have, and I guess people wouldn't normally care about. As you say, this obviously we've got this sort of rabid fan base that's after some information. But Pux, I think we've got a couple of questions from a few people in chat that I think Luke may be able to help answer.
Yeah, sure thing. So first one in from Maceco says, my question to Luke is how many work hours / employees were involved in this when they are investigating the merger?
It's difficult questions to know. A lot in both. I mean, employee-wise, if you're talking about lawyers alone, you would usually have, the firms that Microsoft and Activision are using will have dedicated competition lawyers. So that's all they do. Like, they don't even do like M&A, basically. They just do competition stuff. And, there you might be talking maybe, but just in terms of the counsel, as in, external to Microsoft and Activision lawyers, the ones that they're bringing in, I think one of them is using Skadden, for example, which is a law firm. You're talking like 20 to 30, maybe 10 to 20 competition lawyers, but overall M&A lawyers, you're looking at more than that. Then you've got whoever from Microsoft itself and Activision are actually coordinating their in-house legal teams, so probably add on another 20 to 30 plus. Then you've got everybody else underneath that structure, people in different areas of the business gathering information, that's relevant. So a lot more. So, there's easily, 100 plus people working on this, probably many more than that. And then in terms of hours, it's a lot. Like, it's a lot of man hours, thousands of hours are kind of put onto these massive mergers, because it's the thing that kind of dictates how long you take with a competition process really is the size of the underlying deal. The bigger it is, the more work's involved, because the more information you need to gather and the more kind of ripple effect ramifications the merger has on different elements of a market. So yeah, a lot. And then on the CMA side, a lot less actually. So, the phase one panel probably been about three to five people working on that. Phase two, there's a little bit more, but it's still not tons. I think they've already said it's the makeup of that panel. I think it's maybe 5 people. So yeah, it's a lot of people, a lot of hours, a lot of money, obviously, for Microsoft. So yeah, it's a pretty involved
$70 billion
process.
deal isn't going to come cheap. Is this look why? And actually, Misuga's just put in the chat. It sounds massive, both people and money wise, and yeah, I suspect some lawyers are getting very well paid because of this deal. But in these types of deals, I believe in this case it's in the matter of billions. There's almost some sort of clause that effectively means Microsoft will need to pay Activision Blizzard in the event that the deal falls through. Is that to cover these kinds of costs effectively, and time and resource that has effectively been not necessarily wasted, but that's been used for what was an unsuccessful attempt.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I think it's 3 billion. This one,
Yeah,
if it falls down.
Cheap.
No, not cheap. I mean, to Microsoft, that's pretty cheap, but it's everybody else. But I mean, not that they'd want to pay that anyway, because it's just wasted money at that point, isn't it? But that's exactly right. It's meant to cover. It's meant to cover a whole bunch of things, but it's kind of covering the time, expense, the monetary outlay that's gone into all of this. So instructing lawyers and other, they'll have accountancy firms involved. Consulting firms involved, like all of these are really expensive, and then some of it will also be to guard against stock price fluctuations that would happen for Activision. Not that they correlate to making money, but they have an impact on the market cap of the company, which in turn affects kind of investor perception, means that they're less likely to raise as much capital as they have previously, potentially. That's exactly what it's for, to cover kind of all these little pies, or big money pies, that have gone into the deal, which is now collapsed.
Yeah, because we're talking years of work. Will have been, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I think the CMA put a deadline of the 1st of March 2023, maybe just March 2023, which I think from maybe when you were on the World of Gaming, Luke, I think you said it's not that it'll necessarily happen before then. It'll effectively, the decision will more or less be made around that time. Is that correct, or did I misunderstand? I think you might have said something along those lines.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, they will, I think the CMA will notify provisional findings before then. So they will probably notify what they think, from a provisional sense, about January, February. And then the deadline for their final report is 1st of March, unless they extend it beyond that, which they can do for up to 8 weeks. Sometimes that does happen, but they'll probably notify the parties about what their initial findings are from kind of the couple of, the November, December. That's kind of the big analysis period for them. They'll talk about what they found and what they think the outcome is in January. And then they usually invite a bunch of party submissions, and different responses to their provisional findings, and then they will make a final report, and that has to be done by 1st of March, unless they extend it.
So if you're one of those who were betting on it closing this year, maybe
you've got no chance.
Those expectations. So
I've actually got a question for Luke, if that's all right. So, this may well have been answered at some point in the past, so apologies if it has been around there already. But one of the things I've been wondering, actually, as you've been talking, is is Saudi Arabia and Brazil, and I think maybe one or other few territories we've heard nothing about it apart from, they've ticked the box and gone, yep, this is perfectly fine. We see no issue with this at all. And then, CMA UK have turned around and said, actually, there's all these massive concerns that we have. Is there any particular reason for this disparity? Is it a case of, are we in the UK just being really stringent in our investigation, or have the other territories been more lax in theirs? Or is there any, why is there this big difference of the other countries or territories were okaying this, and then we seem to have a lot of massive scrutiny and say, actually, it feels like there's now this high risk that actually the whole thing could fall through because of the CMA?
Yeah. It's kind of a mixture of two things. So one thing is that the CMA and the EU Commission in particular, and to some extent the FTC, I guess, / the DOJ in America, their competition regimes and the way that they run their organizations, the way that they run their regulatory authorities, are kind of naturally more developed, do I want to say? They are pretty big by comparison to any other competition authority in the world, and they have much more experience. And usually the underpinning regulation is maybe a bit more stringent, and the powers that they have, etc., are a bit more, a bit broader. potentially. So one of the and I don't mean this in any way to offend the competition authorities that have approved it, but was Saudi Arabia ever going to really care about this? Do you know what I mean? Like, was that ever going to be an issue for something like this? Probably not. Cade used to be very, very stringent, but I know in recent years they've become less so. That's not to say they haven't done proper analysis, but that brings me on to kind of the second reason why they may differ, which is because at the end of the day, ultimately, they're backed by different people, and people have differences in opinion on everything, and in the case of reviewing M&A activity from a regulatory perspective in terms of competition, you could put a bunch of the same evidence in front of many different people and they would have different views on it using the powers that they have and the tools of analysis that they have at their disposal. So if you gave just a random one to me, you and Scott, and gave us the same information, we come to different conclusions about whether that thing is okay or not. So that's kind of partly one of the other reasons why they differ. It's not just that maybe the CMA, the EU Commission, etc., are a bit stringent, a bit more advanced, sophisticated in terms of their analysis, but also because one of the primary differentiating factors is people, right? So kids, remember that a regulatory review of an M&A deal isn't like reviewing a scientific experiment. It's not, you can't say with certain, a scientific experiment, most of the time you can say with absolute certainty why you've come to a conclusion based on the evidence in front of you, because it's usually completely empirical evidence. You can't dispute it. It's a matter of fact. With this sort of stuff, there is a load of evidence that's presented, but it comes from differing sources which may or may not have their own vested interests. And so there's an evidential weight where you're weighing this evidence out and then analysing the thing that's in front of you. And so you might come to a different conclusion. And one of the things that regulators have to do is they have to almost make a decision on the hypothetical, right? Because they're looking at what impact this could have, or is it likely to have it. They can't know that because they won't know until if they approve it, and then 4 years down the line, they're like, actually, we should never have approved that because look what's happened. So they have to kind of make a best guess judgment almost, based on all the evidence they have.
Yeah, on that point, because I found the hypothetical thing is, I guess the way that they look at it from a hypothetical standpoint, I thought was quite interesting, because I guess it kind of works both ways, doesn't it? Because you could say, hypothetically, if the deal doesn't go through and Xbox then decide to not, let's say, participate in the gaming industry, you could lead to a situation where Sony completely dominates. So do they look at it from that sort of perspective as well? They're not just looking at hypothetically, if this goes through, maybe are they also looking at it, if this doesn't go through, what kind of impact might that have on other competitors, particularly one that's maybe in a stronger position, dare I say?
Yeah, I mean they do that, but it's all kind of rolled into the main analysis that they're undertaking. So, because what they're looking at is likelihood, right? Is it likely that this will cause a substantial lessening in competition? Yeah. And by inference, that means you have to look at, okay, what if we don't allow it? What happens? Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess the evidential way is more like the thing that they're more focused on is what will happen if we do allow it, because that's their power. But they will consider, what would happen if it didn't. And I think the difference is, their standpoint is the market as they see it now. And as they see it now, they think it's fair competition, that it's well balanced. Yeah. So they wouldn't really have any issue, because I don't think they would dream in a million years that Microsoft, as a successful participant in that market, after not getting the merger, would just go, you know what, we're done. Because clearly they wouldn't be, right? Because they'd take that $70 billion and be like, okay, we're going to invest it somewhere else.
Where else can we put it?
Yeah, where else can we put it in the market? Because it's a really great market for them, even if they, they're not the leader in it. They still make tons of money from it. So, so that's kind of where they'd fall.
Cool. Look, sorry, Pux, do we have any other questions from the chat there, mate?
Yeah, we have some comments from Sentinel, which was quite interesting, who says, this is when you was talking earlier, Luke, saying that's really interesting. Now I'm wondering why Microsoft didn't contest the acquisition of Insomniac back in the Sony day by Sony back in the day, because according to how the CMA looks at this, means that the Insomniac acquisition absolutely would have qualified for such scrutiny under the CMA's guidelines. I appreciate the issue of this would be that you're talking retrospective about 20 years, right? So,
well, I guess the acquisition of Insomniac was what, 6 years ago or something?
Yeah,
something
6, 7 years ago.
Fairly recent.
Else, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. But Luke, if I can maybe try and maybe offer some uneducated insight, and you can maybe correct me inevitably when I'm wrong. But I guess there's a couple of things here when I saw this question. I think the first thing is, obviously, it's a question of size. And I imagine there's a threshold of some variety where it's kind of like, obviously, the acquisition of Insomniac wasn't going to tip, the scales in any favor, despite, obviously, Insomniac's, excellent games. I guess maybe there's also an element of Insomniac on a UK company. So I guess the CMA couldn't even interject in that acquisition anyway. It's not like Activision Blizzard where they have both of these companies have staff and offices and things like that in the UK. Would that be the case, or could the CMA still, if they felt, have some sort of impact on a deal like that?
Yeah, the main reason the Sony Insomniac merger would have never been reviewed, I would think, is mainly to do with your first point, which is size, because under the Enterprise Act, which is the law in the UK that gives the CMA the authority to look at mergers and acquisitions, you have to meet certain criteria. Rather, a merger or acquisition has to meet certain criteria for it to be notifiable, for it to fall under the jurisdiction of the CMA. And one of those, there are kind of two criteria, but the main one is where the UK turnover of the entity that's being acquired exceeds £70 million. I think it's pretty unlikely Insomniac's UK turnover exceeded £70 million. So if it didn't, the CMA can't review it. It has no jurisdiction to look at it. That's why they didn't, basically. The other test is about share of supply in a market, which is almost impossible for any gaming company to meet, because it requires you to have, it basically says, as a result of the merged entity would have a supply of 25% or more of a particular market, which obviously Sony buying Insomniac, even Sony itself doesn't have 25% of a market, right, in the UK, because there are so many markets that you could define in that nature. That test is more for things where you have very limited defined markets that are really gobbled up by one or two or three different entities, which it just doesn't happen in gaming. Obviously we have a console gaming market and there are three big players, but it just doesn't work like that. So yeah, the CMA would have never looked at the Insomniac one because they wouldn't have had the jurisdiction to. And in fact, I would be surprised if that had any regulatory competition condition at all to go through. The one we know that did was the Bungie one, which again correlates to the size of that merger. I think Insomniac was what, 300 million. That's how much it cost. The Bungie one was 3 billion. They did see that had regulatory approvals. Interestingly, never passed by the CMA, so clearly it didn't meet the tests. Clearly Bungie didn't exceed £70 million in their turnover. So in the UK, but it did have some clearances it needed elsewhere. So that's why the Insomniac one would have never been looked at.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point about it. Obviously, being turnover in the UK, I guess Bungie as an American company likely has very little turnover in the UK, or would they have turnover purely from UK based sales of their games?
Yeah, that's where the
merchandise,
turnover. Yeah, so if they, obviously all their Destiny stuff, they have a UK base for that, as in, they make turnover in the UK because UK customers buy Destiny and related Destiny stuff. But clearly they didn't buy over £70 million worth of it. So
yeah. And I think maybe on that same train of thought, obviously you've got to remember that Microsoft have made acquisitions in the past that haven't required approval from a regulator as well. UK companies, Ninja Theory, Playground Games, obviously other companies out in the States as well, but those two in particular stand out as recent acquisitions by Microsoft where there was no approval required, at least to my knowledge, or it certainly wasn't a big thing back then, at least anyway. And even if it was required, they obviously got it without any problems because they ended up acquiring those companies. So I guess PlayStation's acquisition of Insomniac, I look at that very similar to Microsoft's acquisition of Playground Games in a way. Very different to an acquisition the size of Activision Blizzard. Both in terms of one being the publisher and obviously the actual value of the deal as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
Masco has a question. In addition to that, he says, "So if Activision were to sell its studios one by one to Microsoft, would that go without any regulatory intervention?"
So
Probably
Microsoft
not.
just bought Treyarch. And then Infinity Ward just by piecemeal. So
if they said, I mean, I get what it means. Like, imagine if they said, okay, we aren't going to buy Activision, but we are going to buy Activision agreed to sell us Treyarch, Sledgehammer, Infinity Ward, all their IP, like in separate transactions, or they'd just like buy one and then maybe a couple of months later buy another until they've actually bought all of Activision. No, the answer to that is that regulators would still investigate that because it's it's effectively illegal behavior from Microsoft at that point, trying to circumvent the competition laws in the UK, for example. So they'd know what they're doing, and then they'd retrospectively go and analyze it, and we'd be back where we are now. But if they bought Treyarch, right, just on their own, no Call of Duty, wouldn't be an issue. You know what I mean? Like, it would have no impact at all from a competition perspective, and nobody would review it. Same if they bought Infinity Ward. I guess the only one, if they'd managed to buy like Infinity Ward and the Call of Duty IP, depends on how much. Probably not. Actually, I'm thinking about it, and actually, Infinity Ward, I don't know how a regulator would review that in terms of like a turnover test or anything like that, because Infinity Ward don't necessarily make their own turnover. It's Activision Blizzard who do. So, I don't know. That's more of an interesting question, a hypothetical, but I'm sure Microsoft might have analysed something like that. But it's interesting.
Basically, you sneaky devil, you.
It's sneaky.
I've got a generic question for you chaps, actually, unless you wanted to move on to another topic, Scott. But
no, keep going. I'm enjoying this box.
Because I know earlier in the week, Scott, or it was some point, I think it was during the week, you shared a link to, I think it was like a load of Microsoft responses to this, and you had a comment saying that, actually it's all read quite fair, and it was all quite agreeable from Microsoft's side, at least from the way it was worded. And I think one of the important points I do remember reading was, this is my own summary, of course, but PlayStation throwing their toys at the pram, saying they don't like this, but then Microsoft have turned around and said, well, actually, the idea of why we're doing this is to advance gaming distribution or comments to that effect, and to say that actually all we're doing is innovating more so, and PlayStation are actually in a perfectly good position to innovate on their own to also compete against this. Like, we're not doing anything that's not above board by this acquisition. They're just wanting to take all of this content, put it onto Game Pass to allow gamers of the Xbox ecosystem to either, if they want to buy their games outright, they can do that, or if they want to have it through Game Pass subscription services, they have the option as well. And a lot of people saying, and they also mentioned about how actually, if you are on a PlayStation platform, they don't actually want you to do this, and the only option they give you is to pay full whack for each single individual purchase. So from our perspective as Microsoft, we think actually what we're doing is consumer friendly and blah blah blah. Long-winded kind of setup there, but given outside of, again, this is kind of going backwards now away from the CMA stuff, but from Microsoft's responses that were revealed earlier in the week, whenever it was, like, do you guys have a particular opinion on your thoughts in general? I know we've spoken about generic thoughts on past podcasts and shows, but this is new information about Microsoft actually given their direct response to this, and that they believe that PlayStation are in a perfectly good position to compete and to go against this, rather than just trying to go against it entirely. And some supporting arguments, I say supporting, it's purely subjective, but I know there's a lot of PlayStation fan base out there that believe that PlayStation are almost, dare I say, slacking a little bit this generation compared to PS4. Like they're almost relaxed in their approach to adding new features, or they're quite slow because they know that they're a market leader. Again, I know that's subjective, but given all of those various points, do you think that Microsoft are correct in this, or do you reckon that some of their statements are, I don't know, trying to beat around the bush a little bit, and I don't want to say hide an agenda, but do you know what I mean? Do you think they're just kind of trying to say some nice words to chummy up with the CMA to get them to tick it off, or do they actually have some valid points in your opinion in that actually PlayStation do have the money and the ability to compete, but they, for every reason, are deciding not to?
Yeah, so I think it
was
was
a lot of stuff there. I hope that's clear.
No, that's fine. I remember the post. I think it was thankfully Tom Warren has been posting kind of like snippets from the documentation that have come out, and I think one of the statements that came out from Microsoft, which I think, at the time I said I read it, and from purely my uneducated point of view, shall I say, it did seem fair and reasonable, because a couple of points that Microsoft raised were, the fact that Sony have been kind of the largest platform for, a couple of decades now. They've obviously got a very large fan base, user base. They even referenced things like the fact that Sony had increased the prices of their games and consoles, I believe, and they kind of used that as an example of Sony being able to leverage their power as the market leader, so to speak, without any consequence. So it's. I personally read that particular comment or those points from Microsoft, said, yeah, I think that's fair and reasonable. But of course, Microsoft are going to say that, aren't they? They're obviously going to say anything that puts the deal in good light publicly. I'm not too sure how much I guess, Luke, this probably raises a question from me. These obviously comments that come back from Microsoft publicly, I assume the CMA don't look at them, but I assume Microsoft will be saying very similar things, if not more, and privately to the CMA in the discussions that they've had and will likely to have during the Phase 2 investigation.
Yeah, definitely. I think this was just, this is Microsoft's response to the full analysis under Phase 1. And I think, these are kind of the summary of the things that they will be saying in private to the CMA, or that they have said and will be saying going forward and providing evidence and information for. And I think, again, it's not, the ration. I think I put this at the time in the Discord maybe, but I don't really disagree with anything that they said in that. They were talking about why they thought the CMA's concerns were not correct, essentially, and they gave a list of various reasons, including highlighting Sony's strength in the console market and, repeatedly highlighting where Microsoft were, kind of downplaying that.
Which is quite funny, isn't it? Because they are quite saying, like, look, we're in third, fourth, fifth place,
we're in
revenue. We're not very good. It's quite funny how they're downplaying their own position to make themselves look worse, so the acquisition looks better. Kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah. But that's exactly my point, right? Like, that all of the stuff that Microsoft is saying, like, whether you believe it or not, is kind of irrelevant. Because all Microsoft are trying to do is get the CMA to believe it and for them to buy into Microsoft's ideas. And equally, anything that Sony says in respect of this, anything that they talk about is in the same way trying to get the CMA to buy their version. And the words, like, the CMA have already come out and said, like, they place some very limited evidentiary weight on what Sony says. Like, clearly they do, they have taken on board what Sony have said. But, you know, when they're looking at any responses from either a third party like Sony or, you know, the parties involved, in this case, Microsoft and Activision, like, they don't really care about those in some respect, because they know that they will say whatever they can to kind of tip the balance in their favor. So, you know, they always invite comments and they do review them and have a look, but they place very limited kind of weight on how they impact the CMA's own review. So when Microsoft came out and said all these things, like, of course Microsoft are going to say that. Like, you know, they're going to put out statements and points that they can, in a way that makes it look the deal look very favorable from a competition perspective. And equally, Sony will do exactly the same, but on the opposite end. You know, they will try and show why it's not very good from a competition perspective. I mean, just from a personal standpoint, do I disagree with what Microsoft said in response? I actually don't. I think they made some really relevant points, right? I think a lot of what they said is true from my perspective, you know, but it's all, you've got to always, and this is what people don't do because they get too tied up in, you know, the war over the plastic box, which is they just go, well, you know, Microsoft are telling the truth and Sony are lying, or Sony are lying and Microsoft are telling the truth. Neither of them are telling the full truth about anything that they say in respect to the merger, right? Because they're both coming at it from a perspective of, we need to make this look as favorable as possible to, you know, from one end or another. So I think people should maybe bear that in mind as well, and not cast like certain players as evil or doing weird things. Like they're all kind of full of shit, you know what I mean? Because that's what they need to do because they want the deal to go through. Now, I do think that Microsoft, a lot of what Microsoft is saying, is true and has a lot of weight. And I think it, you know, from a personal perspective, I think it'd be great if they acquired Activision Blizzard. But, you know, any arguments that they're saying in favor of that are not necessarily the true, you know, the true reflection of how things are. They're probably a bit skewed. I mean, they are a bit skewed, but
yeah. And maybe just to go back to your you kind of your original question, Pucks, about, you know, what I guess our general thoughts are. I actually put a tweet out on Friday, which part of me regretted shortly afterwards because of some of the responses I got, which was I don't think the CMA will approve it, based on not an awful lot, admittedly, but essentially. And look, you can let me know if this is sort of in any way rational or whether I'm overthinking it or whatever. But essentially, what I said on Friday was, when I read through the arguments from the CMA, and particularly in the way that they've split their arguments into the kind of the three sectors of cloud, games subscriptions, and the more traditional console market. When I look at the comments that they make, and the way I see it is, if they've come to the conclusion that I guess they've not come to any conclusions yet, it's probably obviously fair to say, but the findings that they've presented so far, the way that I kind of looked at it is, I'm struggling to see how they go from the findings that they've presented so far to a conclusion at the end of the phase 2 investigation where they say, oh, actually, this is okay now. Now, that might not necessarily be fair because of the process that they follow, because maybe they look at it from purely a worst case scenario and then they get into the detail and actually think, oh, actually no, it's not that bad, it could actually help competition when they go through their phase 2 investigations. But I'm struggling to see at the moment, based on what they've presented so far and the limited reading I've done on it. Admittedly, I've not read through the 76-page document or whatever they ended up posting, because I can't be arsed, but based on what I've read, I'm kind of thinking I don't see how they get from that to yes, is essentially the way that I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
So we'll obviously have to wait and see. But I guess unfortunately, whatever way you want to look at it, we do have a lot of. We've got another 6 months of this of this left. I guess will it go kind of quiet now, Luke? I assume.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, at least until January, I'd say. I don't think you'd hear much else. January, you might get an announcement of provisional findings. But up until then, it's just heads down, pen to paper time for the CMA now. Reviewing everything again, and also reviewing loads of extra stuff.
Yeah.
Different people reviewing it as well within the CMA. So yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of agree. Like, I've always been pretty confident it will go through from a UK perspective, which I think is probably the hardest regulatory jurisdiction to clear, apart from the Commission. But the more you kind of look at it, and particularly the way in which Microsoft are responding to some of this, the way that that's happening is somewhat out of kilter to the way this would go sometimes. So I think clearly Microsoft have some genuine anxiety about what the CMA have found, and their view on things, because they're really trying to kind of swing these guys the other way. And yeah, I mean, as you say, you kind of read a lot about the kind of three areas that the CMA have identified and their rationale, and you think, okay, how on earth would Microsoft turn that view around? Because it's really difficult, because I think certainly in some of the things that the CMA are talking about, I guess, not necessarily the Call of Duty exclusivity Activision content thing, because I don't like because of what Microsoft has said publicly, and which I'm sure they want to do, and because it's a single game and all of that stuff. Like, I genuinely don't believe that would lessen competition if it went through. But if you look at the CMA's arguments in terms of, these nascent markets that are emerging in gaming, so particularly cloud gaming and subscriptions, some of their analysis is pretty agreeable to some extent. Like, yeah. And they always get spooked out about new markets and stuff, because essentially those are the times where one party, i.e. Microsoft, can really dominate. And potentially lead to bad outcomes from consumers. Now, do I think that they would dominate in those markets? Cloud gaming, multi-game subscription services, no. But if you look at the infrastructure that they have, and then the kind of content pipeline that they have, and all those sorts of things, and the price point they can offer all of this stuff at, given the amount of loss that they can incur, then there is potential, isn't there? Like, I know it's unlikely, but there is. And I guess... Yeah. But the question for the CMA is, they're looking at that unlikely element. Do they think that's unlikely, or do they think it's likely? Because if they think that it's likely, then the deal is done. Like, they'll sink it. So if I was doing it, I would be reviewing, and I would be focusing on those two theories of harm. And I'd be saying, the conclusion, I don't have all the evidence, obviously, but just from a kind of industry, hobbyist perspective, and looking at all that I know about it, like, do I think it's likely that would happen? No. So I'd probably allow the deal through, but the CMA, I'm not the CMA. So it's really interesting, I think. And I do think it's really difficult to read it and think, how will the CMA actually kind of pivot themselves away to an area where they can allow it? And it may be they will allow it, but only subject to certain concessions, which who knows what they would be. Like, again, like what on earth could you do in those markets, to from a structural perspective, to alleviate the CMA's concerns? I genuinely don't know. So it's an interesting question.
Because the type of undertakings that we've spoken about in the past are things like, they could say Call of Duty will be on PlayStation with feature parity at everything forever. Like, maybe that wouldn't be but just as maybe an extreme example. But I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, Luke, but I believe something that either came out recently, it might have been part of Friday, was maybe a comment from the CMA that said that wouldn't necessarily be something that would look at, because contracts can essentially be torn up. They can be changed, or they can essentially be broken at a later date. So Microsoft signing a contract that says we'll give you Call of Duty for 10 years doesn't really mean an awful lot. So they wouldn't necessarily factor that sort of thing. So then that begs the question, what exactly could they do if they were going to have some sort of... So yeah, I'm actually, and again, speaking from my perspective, I'd be pretty nervous if I was Microsoft. I'd maybe be making sure I've got that couple of billion stored away. Well, I know they've got that couple of billion stored away, but yeah. And actually, I think before I go on to my next question, because I think this is another thing that was discussed a lot on Friday. Actually, no, I'll come to Pucks in a moment. So I know, Luke, you've been fairly confident in the past. I think if I remember last time we spoke about it, you said you were about 70-30 sort of approval compared to not approval. Has that changed with the kind of more recent things? Are you a little bit more 50-50? Are you a little bit swaying towards no at this point? Has that changed?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of on the 50-50 mark now. And not because of anything the CMA have done, but just because of Microsoft's response to it all. Because it suggests that they're very frustrated and or anxious about the CMA. So that's what gives me... And if they're worried about it, then there's a reason to worry, because usually you would go into these things pretty confident of your position. So you wouldn't really have an issue because you get there eventually. And I'm sure Microsoft did go into this very confident about it. Obviously, their lawyers would have looked at this a lot and given them their best view. But it just seems like maybe they didn't really expect the response that they got from the CMA. Like, I think they would have always expected them to take it to phase 2. Like, that would have been an obvious expectation. Maybe they didn't expect the theories of harm that the CMA talked about, or the way that the CMA would define markets and stuff like that. So I think that's what gives me kind of a bit of pause about it. And obviously, I think the commission are looking at this now as well. I would be shocked if that didn't go to phase 2 in the EU as well, because typically they would do. So,
It was never going to be easy, but yeah, maybe
no,
they didn't expect it to be quite as
difficult as that's been,
as it's proven to be. And this does Stadia, or maybe the lack of Stadia now, maybe have any sort of impact here, do you think, like, considering one of the key markets is cloud services and one of Microsoft's only real competitors in that service said, look, no, we're pulling the plug because it's not worked. I suspect that's maybe an area where they look at it and they say, look, there's less competition in that space now, so that's probably not a good thing for Microsoft, especially the timing of it, at least.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really good point. And, I can't remember, Google said something about this, didn't they, somewhere when they talked about Stadia closing. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they said something to the effect of, it's because of, the position of Microsoft, that, one of the reasons we kind of backed out is because of that. So that will be relevant to the CMA, because bearing in mind as well, the CMA might go out and see that and be like, oh, maybe we should get Google, to tell us a bit of, in more detail about what they meant, because they were, as you say, they were an early competitor in the cloud gaming, multi-game subscription market, and they pulled out, right? And they went into it pretty big, and then kind of trotted out. Now, do I like, it's kind of weird analyzing this stuff, because on the one hand, do I think that Microsoft were to blame for Stadia going out? No, of course not, because Google simply did not invest enough money, right? They needed to do a number of things in terms of creating content for that platform to get people involved, to really get an uptake in users, and to make that a success. But in a way, it kind of proves the CMA's point, because Google, as big as they are, could not find it feasible to create the kind of structure that Microsoft created in terms of, no, I don't mean in terms of delivery of a cloud service or a game subscription service, but in terms of the thing that drives those services, which is content. Like, they felt they couldn't compete with that. right? And some of that's probably posturing bullshit to some extent, 'cause of course it is. But some of that's probably true. They didn't find it feasible in terms of the amount of money they wanted to invest into it to get up to Microsoft's level. Which it's kind of like, if you look at what Microsoft have in terms of IP, studios, personnel, it's massive, right? It's absolutely ginormous. It costs them a ton of money. So it doesn't. It's a kind of a really ill-timed exit for Microsoft in their case, because it does. Obviously, it does kind of paint the acquisition in a worse light than perhaps if Google was still around, because it kind of looks like that Microsoft are doing all of this and just kind of gobbling up big IPs and enterprises and other participants in that market are just not there. And I think the thing that's probably worrying for the CMA is that they say, okay, well, yeah, we could have Sony could be a competitor here in the cloud market. They already operate in it. Multi-game subscription services, they're already operating it. But Nintendo aren't a participant really in the cloud gaming market. Obviously, they have that small cloud gaming function, but they have no infrastructure really for that. And then I guess the CMA would kind of look at it and go, okay, maybe Amazon, what kind of companies could compete? Amazon could, Google could, but Google did and they lost. Amazon could, but they're not really properly invested in it. And then the thing that will be worrying to the CMA is like, well, who else could have competition? Like if it's just Microsoft and Sony, and then Microsoft do all this stuff, that's not good for consumers in that market, particularly if it's a market where it's just emerging. And one of Microsoft's points was actually to say, oh, well, the adoption of cloud gaming is really low at the minute. And I think that was a really poor point to make. Like, if anything, that strengthens what the CMA are worried about, because it says the market is emerging, right? The adoption rate's super low at the moment. It won't be in the future. It will be much higher. So, yeah, it's all a bit hodgepodgey and a bit weird at the moment, but I don't think the Google stuff was well timed.
Can I ask as well, actually, onto that, because you mentioned about, they're looking at Nintendo in terms of the cloud structure. And yeah, as you just said, yes, they have some cloud capability of certain titles, but it's not their own infrastructure, right? But would they not look at someone like Nintendo and go, well, okay, they're not Xbox and PlayStation, but they are a massive contender in the games industry. Have been around for decades, and they're turning profit upon profit as well. So do they not look at that from a slightly different angle and go, well, Nintendo doesn't have Call of Duty or all the other stuff, and they're doing absolutely fantastic on their own. So
I think they did.
Is that
well, they did. They did do that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they did do that.
Sorry.
No. That's they outlined that in their in the full decision of their phase one analysis. They said that I can't remember if they said that Microsoft had told them about Nintendo, like as in they'd said, well, Nintendo don't have Call of Duty and they don't have X, Y, and Z, and they still, they're bigger than we are in the console market. And the CMA basically just said, yeah, and right, because the way the CMA looked at it was to say, well, yes, because Nintendo can be differentiated from Sony and Microsoft because Nintendo have always focused on family-friendly offerings, right? They occupy kind of a distinct, which is the same thing we say all the time, right? So, like we say, Nintendo are on their own island because they are. Yeah. They're not competing at all with Sony and Microsoft, but Sony and Microsoft are absolutely direct competitors. Yeah. In the console space and in other market spaces as well in gaming. So the CMA basically said we don't find any weight in that argument because it's kind of comparing apples to oranges. We're actually trying to compare apples to apples, Sony to Microsoft, not to Nintendo. So they looked at it, they considered it. It's a particular argument, but they don't agree with it at all, basically.
They kind of said that Nintendo's audience wouldn't buy Call of Duty, and obviously they didn't necessarily say those words exactly, but they essentially said, look, Call of Duty isn't for Nintendo's market. So
that makes perfect sense. Yeah,
they're
not the target fan base.
But it is interesting though.
You buy a Nintendo for Mario and Zelda, exactly.
You raise a really good point that they are kind of separating Nintendo from the equation, which I guess again makes it more difficult for Microsoft because it's now not a 3-platform race that they're trying to convince, it's kind of a 2-platform. competition in some respects. So
it's a very minor question just after that as well. So do you reckon, I mean, again, I appreciate why Sony have their concerns being a direct competitor, but even though Nintendo aren't, I think there's still been a number of other various Activision-based or whatever games that did come to Nintendo in the past. Would they have any reason to be worried about this, do you reckon, in terms of maybe certain popular-ish titles that maybe come to Switch on? I appreciate the answer is most likely no, and I can understand why fully, but just one of those, like, from a legal perspective, would they have like a lawyer somewhere that goes, oh, do we care? And maybe like head honcho just goes, no, I don't give a shit. But would something have been thought about internally? I guess is my question at Nintendo HQ somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the kind of commercial heads of Nintendo looked at it and said, "Does this actually have any impact on us? Should we be kind of negative in our approach if we're approached by a regulator to give an opinion on this stuff?" But I think the answer for Nintendo would have just been, we don't care at all. Like, it makes no difference to us at all, because we just don't rely on any, like, not that Sony rely on Activision franchises, but they clearly play, one in particular, clearly plays a very important part of Sony's kind of platform, their revenue, their kind of attraction to gamers, casual gamers, etc. So it's kind of much more fundamental to some extent on Sony's platform than it is on Nintendo's, because on Nintendo's, like, what are they going to lose out on? Crash. Who cares? For Nintendo, like, they've got the number one platformer IP in the world. Sorry,
but
number
also,
two after
Microsoft
Sonic.
and Nintendo kind of play nice in some respects, don't they? I don't think
they're on good
Microsoft
terms.
acquiring
So.
Activision Blizzard would negatively impact anything. Even Microsoft have kind of publicly stated they would want to bring games like Call of Duty to the Switch if they could. If acquisitions go through. So Nintendo potentially, I guess, do gain from it. But some of the interesting things that came out, the CADE, the Brazil regulators, were some of the responses that came from some of the other competitors in the industry. Google were one of them. Luke, I don't know if you remember, where basically, I'm obviously paraphrasing in a way here, but they basically just said, look, it's fine. Like, they didn't sort of express any concerns, but that was before they shut Stadia. I think Nintendo were maybe reached, but they didn't actually provide any sort of response. So there are. It was funny because I think a lot of what came out from that was, look, everyone seems to be okay with it except for Sony, which is understandable. Like, of course, Sony are the ones that technically are going to lose out, while no one else really is going to lose out, are they? Like, other companies, other publishers, there was the interview with, I can't remember the name, but essentially the CEO of Take-Two, I think, was just this past week, and he basically said, I think it will be a good thing for the industry. But, he's the one that potentially gains if Take-Two want to get acquired in the future. So it's difficult to understand exactly what to believe or not. So, Pox, based on everything you've heard so far, then, mate, how are you feeling about it? Do you think it's going to go through?
I think I'm on the same kind of level as Luke, actually. Again, I know a lot less, but I from everything I've heard / things I've read over the last week or whatever it's been, I went from being about maybe 80% or 80 to 90% sure that it was going to be a problem to actually this out of nowhere feels like it's a real threat, and actually, 50-50 for me. I think it could go either way at this point based on the little we know, arguably, without knowing what goes on behind closed doors. I would like for it to go through, obviously. I personally think it is a good move. There was some there's some conversation in the chat as well about, I think someone made a comment about, PlayStation, this generation feel like they've been resting on their laurels a bit. I think someone else came back and mentioned about, well, how can you say that? Because, there's God of War and some other Horizon, all these other big games coming out. And my perspective, I chimed in a little bit and mentioned that, for me, as an observer, someone who doesn't have a PS5, the public opinion I seem to see online is that in terms of other innovations and stuff that PlayStation are developing for their ecosystem, it seems to be a bit lax compared to their jump from PS3 to PS4. Yes, they're bringing out, they've got the DualSense controller and their new VR headset coming out and stuff. But but I consider the VR headset to be quite a niche still. Personally, I don't think it's not like the mass market of PlayStation owners is gonna jump to that, right? But from my perspective, from what I've witnessed, it seems like a lot of the PlayStation fan base don't seem to think that there's been as big an innovative leap between PS4 to PS5. So long story short, I think, by having this kind of massive sudden industry change and shift, then I kind of feel like it would force them to have to do something. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think ultimately everyone gains from that. Obviously, these companies have to trial and error with new innovations and ideas, what they want to develop. But I think, we as consumers would benefit, right? So I don't see why it would be a problem from that kind of perspective. But again, I do also understand the concerns as well. So, but yeah, 50-50 for me.
I know what you mean, Pux, and I think it's interesting. I know Stubbs has just put in the chat that maybe PlayStation has done more than Xbox this generation. And if you were talking purely about first party output, in terms of games,
it's a weird. I mean, I agree with the statement, but it's also
agree.
very, very top level. When you kind of delve into that, you could argue both ways that actually Game Pass has done loads this generation because of the massive leap in change and additions to Game Pass, right? And it's completely changed the way that Xbox gamers consume content and save money, and then it all comes a little bit, then it kind of leans a bit political, and you talk about the environment and saving money and stuff. But then equally, I agree, PlayStation have done it as well with new, they do bring kind of like Nintendo, but not quite, not to any extreme. But yes, they've innovated on Rumble features. They've got the Dual Sense and things like that, and they have these kind of cool ways that you can interact with games. That's all true. So I don't know if I agree that they've arguably done more than Xbox, because I think that statement is that's kind of like tunnel visioned. If you're talking about games only, then sure, if you're talking first party lineups. But I think as a whole, when you talk about all of the things around it, whether it's games, lineups, and other innovations that they're bringing, I personally feel like they're kind of 50-50. Since Stubbs in the chat just saying, well, Game Pass came out last gen. It's not new. True, but it was very new and it was very, very much in its infancy, and there wasn't really much content there. And I'd argue it's only been in this generation, since the release of the series consoles, that actually Game Pass has had a kick, and it's Microsoft have put much more effort into it in the last couple of years than they did the first few, because they've had to. So I mean, I guess my opinion on that statement.
Is sorry to interrupt. That last point where you're saying they have to. That's a really, really valid point to make, because I think the question of complacency, if you go back through the generations, you look at the 360 generation the 360 PS3 generation. The argument that people would make, which I think would be fair, is that the PlayStation brand took a bit of a kicking during that generation, particularly at the beginning, regarding things like pricing and things like that. And Microsoft really stole a march on PlayStation that generation because of pricing and the release date and things like that. And I think a lot of people thought that Sony's approach during that generation, you hear the quotes, or you saw the quotes at the time where they were saying people should get an extra job to get a PlayStation because it was this premium thing. And the PlayStation 4, I don't think it's controversial to say, benefited from Sony getting a little bit of a kick in during that generation. But equally, Microsoft went from the Xbox to the 360, which was such a massive leap in terms of console sales at the very least, that they went in the Xbox One generation complacent and they had a disaster. And then that's why things like Game Pass exist to this day. And because Game Pass exists, that's why those PlayStation Plus tiers exist, and why they're offering the games that they are. And that now they haven't quite gone to the full, first party games on the PlayStation Plus from day one. But would they have done what they've done with PlayStation Plus if Game Pass didn't exist and kind of wasn't forcing Sony to do that? I would probably argue that they wouldn't have. So when people are talking about complacency this generation, I think what they're talking about is things like raising game prices to $70, raising their console prices by $30. Would they do that if they were in second place, if they were in Microsoft's position and they were wrestling for market? Sorry, I don't know what the term is. It's escaped my mind. But if they were essentially in second place behind Microsoft, would they be doing those things, or would they have not, because they would be trying to get more of the market share? I think that's when people what people are talking about when they talk about like complacency, not necessarily games and things like that of features. So, but I might be wrong. I might be wrong when I say that. So
no, I think I mostly agree with that. I mean, I think the latest thing, which is slightly different and new. PlayStation brought out their new PlayStation Stars. Well, they call it a loyalty program, and I look at it as a kind of fun, dare I say, gimmick to just get these little kind of trophies that you can collect and stuff. It's almost like an addition to achievements in a way. And I always like things like that. But, it needs a lot of work and it's very much in its infancy and new. And, maybe that's where the world goes in, dare I say, on Xbox's side. If you complete a game that you like and you get a little virtual figurine that you can put on your gamer tag or something, then cool. I mean, everyone thought achievements were like, what's the point of achievements? And then people loved them, and then it got so popular that PlayStation jumped on board with trophies. So little things that sometimes, my point being that sometimes it's these tiny little things which can sometimes make the difference, as well as the massive things. So
but PlayStation Stars probably doesn't exist without Microsoft Rewards, and I forget the name of Nintendo's sort of loyalty scheme. But people have been asking Sony for these things because the competition offers them, and that's why I guess competition is good. Now, if you would ask us if I think that the acquisition would be good for competition, I personally would say yes, but I'm not somebody whose job it is to make that decision, because of course I'm going to say that, because I'm a Game Pass subscriber. I'm going to benefit. I've said all along I wanted to go through because I want Diablo in Game Pass. If I can get it, great. I benefit from that, but that's not what they're looking at, because if it means that in the future I'm going to have to pay 50 quid a month for Game Pass because Microsoft are dominating that space, then that's not good for me, because although it's in Game Pass, it's stupidly expensive. So Luke, one final question on it, I think, and then we'll see if anyone in the chat has any other questions, please let us know. And obviously, Puxley, if you got any more for Luke. But I think one question that came up a lot on Friday, or one point people made was, well, if the CMA block the deal, then Microsoft will just pull out of the UK, won't they? Like, they'll just not operate in the UK, which I think seems unlikely because of the size of the market. But is that realistically an option Microsoft have? Could they? I mean, first of all, actually, is it even realistic that the CMA are the only regulator that blocks this deal? And if they are, do they even have an option where they could just say, right, we're just not operating in the UK anymore?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. You do see this again. You do see this a lot, and it's kind of illuminating how stupid some people can be with this stuff sometimes, or how ignorant, I guess, from a not a legal perspective, but just like a business perspective, just like common sense, almost common sense level stuff. So, I mean, first of all, it's possible other regulators could block it, not just the CMA. I think everybody's worried about the CMA because they're the only ones who have taken it to a phase 2 so far. But of course, we'll have another round of this, I'm sure, when the EU takes it to a phase 2. Yeah. About the EU, they've been getting them PlayStation 5 bribes, early copies Ragnarok have been coming in for them,
Jim Ryan flying in his private jet.
Yeah, that's why he went to Brussels. He came in his jet, and his jet had a load of PS5s and early copies of Ragnarok, and they said, Jim, don't worry, we'll take care of it.
Don't forget the special tier 5 of PlayStation Stars.
Oh yeah, sorry,
staff as well. Look,
so there's a equivalent tier for EU staff as well. So that'll be coming up. So yeah, like it's not realistic that it's only the CMA. Sorry, it's not unrealistic that the CMA are the only aren't going to be the only entity that blocks it. Like another entity could, but even if they did, even if the CMA were the only entity to block it, what people don't understand, and you can go back, and I say this from experience of this stuff. Not in deals this big, but ones that are still worth many millions of pounds, is that in your merger agreement, you have conditions to completion. You have conditions that say these things need to be satisfied before you can complete the deal, the transaction under this agreement. If you go to the SEC filings for Microsoft and Activision, they have to broadly disclose kind of all the many of the terms of the merger agreement, because they needed to do that One, from an SEC perspective, obviously, because Microsoft and Activision are listed. Also, because the merger agreement needed to be put to a vote of the shareholders, as everybody remembers. So they have summaries of their, of various parts of the merger agreement. Obviously, it doesn't go into exceptional detail about this stuff because they don't want all of that to be public domain, clearly. But one of the things that it says, which is the thing that I've mentioned multiple times, is that the merger agreement says that they need regulatory approval from the CMA, the EU, the FTC. I think those are the ones that are mentioned by name specifically. And then it said something like, and any other relevant regulatory authorities, something like that, right? If you can't complete that condition, if the CMA block it, if you have no, they don't agree to any concessions, you can't meet them in the middle, you don't find any remedies. If it's blocked after phase 2, it ends. That's it, because you can't complete the deal under the agreement. The agreement can't be completed. So it's not even a case where you'd have a situation where, like, maybe Microsoft are like, oh, you know what, we'll probably chance it and we'll go and we'll just do X, Y, and Z in the UK because we're happy enough elsewhere that, this brings big benefits to our organization. Like, they cannot do that because the merger agreement will not let them do that. It will not let them buy Activision Blizzard. It's a condition precedent. If a condition can't be fulfilled, you can't do the thing you want to do under the agreement, which in this case is buy Activision. So even in a world, and this is purely hypothetical now, even in a world where the merger agreement did not say that, would Microsoft want to pull out of the UK market? No, they wouldn't, because it's like the 7th biggest gaming market in the world. Just the UK, bearing in mind how small the UK is relative to many other places in the world. It's an absolutely enormous gaming market. Call of Duty here is enormously popular. It makes a ton of money. Clearly, it makes a lot of money because Activision clearly make over £70 million a year in turnover, because that's why, the threshold for the CMA was hit. So, they would, there's no way Microsoft would want to proceed and not have the advantages of the merger in the UK market, because it's such an important bit to them, you know what I mean? And that's before you even consider other, like, difficult ramifications of what a blockage and Microsoft trying to proceed would be. The CMA can impose massive fines on entities that have kind of ignored the merger rules, etc., or the decision of the CMA. Microsoft won't want to pay those. It's wasted money. If anything, it reduces the efficacy of the deal elsewhere. You know what I mean? Like, if you're being fined hundreds of millions of dollars by the CMA, and it's potentially wiping out a ton of the advantages you have in the rest of the world, not to mention the fact that you're already down the UK anyway, because you're not able to operate there in the same way, at least as it pertains to Activision. So even in this hypothetical world, like, it just wouldn't happen, so and you can see recent examples of this, like particularly my first point about the merger agreement conditions precedent. The Nvidia ARM deal, it just collapsed. It collapsed because of the CMA decision. Like, could Nvidia and ARM have just said, "Oh, bugger it, we won't go to the UK"? No, they couldn't, because it was a condition to the merger agreement. They got that approval, whether that was with conditions or not, and they didn't. Therefore, the deal died. So, it's just, when people start talking about this stuff, it's just not. It's not that it's not just not realistic. It's that it's all hypothetical, because there's no way that if it's blocked that the deal can proceed under the merger agreement, because you can see that by the disclosures they've had to make about it. So that's, by the way, that's like the most frustrating thing that I read out of all of this, is that one element. So
I got a sense that in your voice when you were talking about it, like, so yeah. But it is interesting, because I think, I don't know why, but sometimes I kind of hear people almost putting down the UK in a way as, oh, it's just the UK, or it's a small market. But you're right, it's not, and I'm pretty sure from Xbox's perspective, it's probably top 3, if not top 2 markets. The UK from their perspective, not just gaming in general. So it doesn't, as you say, they wouldn't want to pull out of the UK, even if that was an option. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it's good to be able to get that one out there, I think, because that was a one that I heard a lot on Friday. Because, like I say, when I tweeted saying, "Look, I don't think this is going to go through," personally, a few people just came out and said, "Well, they'll just not operate in the UK." I was like, it's not. I don't think it quite works like that. I don't think Microsoft would be happy with it. So, Pux, do you have any other questions on the topic, mate? And then we'll maybe see if we've got anything else in chat.
I don't personally. I'm happy to jump into some chat questions if you want.
Yeah, let's go for it.
I've got one here from... So Matesco says, one last question for the panel, i.e. Luke, I think. Let's say a world where MS would get Activision and make their games exclusive. Would that be enough to tie MS and Sony this generation?
Oh, I think he means by tie, he means like in the views of gamers. Would they?
Yeah.
Would it be a draw like that? To me personally, no, because to me definitely no, because I play on everything, so it really doesn't make any difference to me. You know, I want it to happen. The merger in general, because I want stuff on Game Pass, so that would be great. But I think maybe if you're console warring, you know, or maybe if you just have one platform and you kind of insistent that you won't get the other platform, then you might put a lot of weight on Call of Duty and other franchises, and maybe the way that Microsoft would exploit all the talent they would have would be produce new IPs and stuff. So, I mean, either way, it definitely strengthens their first party. But in any case, like, I don't think Call of Duty wise are going to make anything exclusive there. I'm sure they will make some Activision Blizzard games exclusive though. But I don't know what they are.
It's almost purely subjective as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's purely subjective.
If you don't care about Activision Blizzard games, which
it probably doesn't make any difference
for a lot of people, you know. Like I personally couldn't give a shite about Call of Duty. I'm interested in the Blizzard side of the acquisition, not the Activision part of it. To be perfectly honest, and it's funny actually. We've been speaking now for like almost 2 hours, and not once have we mentioned King throughout the entire conversation. Obviously, there is a third pillar of this particular deal as well. But yeah, I think Pux, and it'll be good to hear your view as well. I think it is entirely subjective. I think in a world where Diablo, Overwatch, and Call of Duty are all exclusive to Xbox, at the very least, it moves the needle back somewhere towards the middle. Whether it's a tie or not, like I say, will depend entirely on whether you're interested in those games or not. But Microsoft having Call of Duty, Diablo and Overwatch exclusive doesn't mean that Sony don't have The Last of Us, God of War. Doesn't mean that, you know, if we bring Nintendo in the equation, they don't have Tears of the Kingdom and things like that, you know. So it moves the needle slightly, but I don't think it would bring it into the middle, I guess.
Yeah, I kind of agree in that obviously this is purely subjective, and I don't know, the argument of, you know, after the merger, would it become a tie? I mean, I don't know. You could argue, is it not a tie now? Because it's all down to personal preference, isn't it? I mean, if you're into your Uncharted and your God of Wars, then you leave a PlayStation.
On one point, from a financial perspective, it would effectively be a tie, I believe, more or less. If you look at gaming revenue, I'm pretty sure if you combine Sony,
they're very close anyway.
And combine Microsoft's gaming revenue with Activision Blizzard's, I think, based on the most recent financials, it would be very, very close from that perspective. So maybe, it's a tie from that, but obviously it just depends on what angle you're looking at it from.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes, there is one last one. I'm aware of time as well. So one here from 4GQ TV. I know some of this was maybe answered, but I'll just read the whole thing for completeness. So they say the EU will be stricter than the CMA, but I think Microsoft can still operate in the UK, but they could close the Activision Blizzard HQs in the UK before the CMA finished review, couldn't they? Then the CMA wouldn't be able to review the deal because it would be outside the jurisdiction. I can't even say the word. Jurisdiction. Luke still see above.
There, Pops.
Yeah, I know.
It's one of those things. As soon as you messed up the first time, you
I
didn't have a
know.
chance.
I tried to save it. It finalizes with saying, I'm curious, if Activision/Blizzard didn't have an HQ in the UK, would it not be out of CMA jurisdiction? Said it right that time.
Yeah. Well done. No, so sort of answered this earlier, I guess, but to answer the question, it doesn't make a difference to the CMA whether Activision or Microsoft have a headquarter or an office or anything like that in the UK, as to whether they can review an acquisition like they have been doing. So in the UK, there are effectively two tests that determine whether a merger can be reviewed by the CMA. One of the tests, which is the main one that's used, is whether the entity that's being acquired, in this case Activision Blizzard, has turnover in the UK of over £70 million. If it does, it automatically goes under the purview of the CMA. It doesn't matter that they might have zero staff in the UK. If they have turnover, if they have income that comes from UK consumers that exceeds £70 million, and then they merge with someone, then the CMA has jurisdiction to review that. So it wouldn't make any difference if if, say, I mean, I don't know if Activision has a headquarters here. I know it has some offices, but even if they closed all of those, which they wouldn't, but even if they did, it wouldn't make any difference to the CMA's review, because the CMA still have jurisdiction to review it.
Yeah, and it's probably worth mentioning as well that Microsoft couldn't close their headquarters anyway.
Yeah, they couldn't because they don't own
legally.
them.
Yeah, and obviously, if Activision wanted to do that, well, that wouldn't really matter because, as you say, they still sell unless they just stopped selling their games in the UK. But that kind of goes back to the point we made before, which is, the UK is too big a market to just pull out of for either party, I guess. So,
yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I did think we might be able to get to some other topics, but we've been going 2 hours now on the CMA there, Luke. So hopefully we've been able to maybe provide a little bit of therapy for you, man. Hopefully that's helped alleviate some of the frustrations from Friday just before you go into work on Monday. Maybe you have to go through similar conversations.
Well, there won't be about Microsoft and Sony and Activision, that's for sure. So that'll be nice at the very least.
Yeah. But I guess from our perspective, what hopefully we managed to do it. I think Luke has it in particular, but hopefully what we've been able to do is just provide some maybe knowledge and insight and maybe clarify some misconceptions or misunderstandings about the whole thing. So hopefully people found that informative. And hopefully we don't have to talk about it again for a number of months.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll cover it again January, February time when we get a little bit closer, but hopefully we don't have to cover it again. We can start talking about some games maybe during our next show. So I just want to say thank you to everybody in the chat who joined us. We didn't do shout outs earlier because we didn't really have a spot to do, to be honest, because we just went for I don't think we've ever done 2 hours on one topic before, so we didn't really
that's a GPG record, that one.
A record, yeah.
We'll have to save the PCMR section for next week.
Damn it.
Unfortunately, mate, I think. But thank you very, very much, everyone who's joined. We've got Sentinel, Mr. Inferno Games, Misuko, It's Timmy, Ford, GQTV, which I believe is Carlo, I believe. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Leon was in the chat. Ome Tony, or Ome Tony, apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. We did also have a lot of porn bots in the chat earlier on, so thank you very much to
Shout
those
out to
guys
them.
for dropping by. That kind of makes us feel like we might have made it a little bit when you start getting those sorts of spam bots and they think, this, I think we've done all right there. So Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, and Indy's literally Indy. We're just ending the show, mate. What time's this? You're late.
Come on, Andy.
We're literally finishing it up. To be fair, I didn't have a chance to drop by his show yesterday. I do need to watch that back. So thanks for dropping by right at the very end, Indy, mate. It's always a pleasure. Yeah, we started a little bit earlier tonight, mate. So we're finishing a little earlier as well. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Pux, as always, mate. Thank you very much for coming on. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, mate.
Yes, no, I've always loved doing this. Been doing it for the last 2 years now. It's been just over that. It's been quite a long time actually. I thought about it the other day. So yeah, no, apologies, chat. That I know there's not been as many frequent shows, and life scheduling conflicts seem to be more of a pain in the ass nowadays. But no, hopefully we'll try to bring you another show. Well, very soon, next week, hopefully. So
yeah,
we'll keep
one
you
thing
updated.
I wish we did, Pux. I really wish we numbered our episodes. I'd love to know what
that's a
number
good point,
we're on
actually. Yeah,
if we did. But I was tempted to start at one point, but then we would have been at like 20 or something now, and there would have been like 18 months worth of content missed. So.
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah. I wish,
at some point
I
we'll
wish
have to. Yeah, maybe I'll have to go down at some point and just decide to waste my afternoon and just.
I mean, if you're really bored, mate.
Well, I have read apparently there are ways of automating the process, so I may look into it if it's quick and easy to do it that way. But yeah, no, you know what? I'll look into that. But yeah, as you said, I'd be interested to see how many it's been.
Yeah, it would be good to know, and then we can start numbering them. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about it too much, mate, because I imagine I've been pretty.
I'm not going to pull my hair out over it, but yeah, I'm curious now. So.
And Luke, again, mate, thank you very much. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I appreciate you've talked about this topic a lot on a couple of other shows like World of Gaming. I believe you've been on Boom Show talking about it. I know you mentioned it was maybe a little bit cathartic, being able to correct some of the misconceptions. So hopefully you've enjoyed the show, man.
Yeah, definitely. No, definitely. It is cathartic to actually do this. It's I think it's frustrating being on Twitter sometimes, and I don't, it's not as if I'm going out searching for it, but it just crosses my feed all the time, this stuff, because of just who I follow, etc., and in turn some of the fucking crazy people that they follow. But like it's kind of frustrating to read this stuff sometimes, and so occasions like this are helpful. And even if those people never watch it, it's someone will, and then they're a bit more informed, I guess, and then they might talk to someone online, and the circle goes on, and hopefully eventually we can reach these maniacs that suddenly have just become M&A lawyers and have been involved in competition stuff and just know exactly. There's a couple of people. I'm not going to shout. There's some people in particular that if I could drop kick them, I would. But hopefully they sort themselves out.
Yeah. Well, maybe on that point, what I would maybe ask people is if you have found it informative, this show, please do the usual like, share, subscribe, but please do share it with people on Twitter. If people do seem to have questions on the things that we've covered tonight, please share it out, and hopefully people will appreciate the additional knowledge that Luke imparted on us all tonight. So yeah, but I think on that note, Indy is asking to name and shame. That's for the OnlyFans, Indy. You got to pay extra for the name and
subscribe for that
and share. Yeah, so maybe another time, mate. But yeah, I appreciate everybody for joining. Pux, Luke, again, appreciate you guys for joining us. Hopefully we'll be back next week with a bit of luck. We'll obviously let you know on Discord and the socials when our next show will be scheduled. But thank you all for joining.